Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to start hearing evidence from witnesses from the Tenant Management Organisation. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thank you, sir. May I call Mr. Paul Dunkerton?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunkerton.
Thank you.
Good morning. Do sit down, make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. Thank you very much for attending today to give evidence. If you have difficulty understanding anything I say, please say so, and I'll repeat the question or reformulate the question. If you feel that you need a break at any time, please don't hesitate to say so. Finally, try to keep your voice up so that the transcriber can hear you and keep a record of what you say. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is take you to your statements, and it's right that you've made two statements to the inquiry. They will be in a folder on the table, and they will also flash up on the screen for you. The first statement is dated the 7th of February 2019, and the reference is TMO quintuple 0885, and the second is dated the 7th of November 2019, and that reference is TMO 0084736. First of all, have you read your statements recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that their contents are true?
Yes.
Have you discussed your statements, your evidence, with anyone before coming here today?
No.
And for the avoidance of doubt, all the exhibits are taken to have been formally added to the inquiry record. Now, Mr. Dunkerton, I'd first like to start with questions about your background, your qualifications and your experience.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, it's right that you're a carpenter by trade.
Yes.
And after starting work, you later returned to college, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And that in 2003 and 2004, you completed a higher national certificate and a higher national diploma in building studies, is that right?
Yes.
And whilst you were pursuing your HNC and HND studies, did they involve an element of project management studies?
Yes, they did, yes.
And is it right that you received training in project management at the Spring Grove Property Maintenance between 2001 and 2005?
Yes, they assisted me through my my sort of training period, yes.
And did those projects involve predominantly maintenance and repair and those type of tasks?
Yes, they did, yes.
You then worked as a project manager at Acton Housing Management, is that right?
Yes.
And how long were you at Acton?
Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure, sorry. It was probably 2 years if I had to have, 2, maybe 3 years. Sorry, I'm not entirely sure.
And what type of projects did you manage during your time there?
They were small type of refurbishment or maintenance type projects.
Were any concerned with high-rise buildings?
No, there wasn't.
Now, next you got a job as a project manager at Hammersmith and Fulham Homes, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And how long were you at Hammersmith and Fulham?
Again, I'm not entirely sure, but possibly a little bit longer than Acton Housing, possibly 2, possibly 3, possibly 4 years.
And what type of projects did you manage whilst you were there?
Similar type of refurbishment projects, but a little bit on a larger scale.
And were any concerned with high-rise buildings, can you remember?
But they were not, no.
Now, is it right that you came to the TMO through the Oyster Partnership?
That's correct, yes.
And the Oyster Partnership, is that an employment agency?
It is, yes.
And do you remember whether the TMO were specifically looking for a project manager at the time?
Initially they were looking for a project manager to manage some of their smaller refurbishment type projects, and I was appointed to work with them on managing they called it the Decent Homes Programme, which is a kitchen and bathroom type of refurbishment programme.
And after you'd completed that project, or whilst you were still on that project, is it right that you moved on to the Hidden Homes project?
That's correct, yes.
And what were your responsibilities as part of that project?
Working and bringing some of the projects together, some of the design team, some of the organisation's technical team. So trying to bring all the aspects of a project together for delivery. And part of the TMO was the team was working with the maintenance teams to identify areas that had hidden opportunities to create larger family homes.
Thank you. And then you were later involved in the fire door replacement programme, is that right?
Yes, it's a project I inherited that I saw through to the conclusion.
And what were your responsibilities as part of that programme?
At that particular programme, I inherited the project as the TMO didn't have a project manager in place at a particular time to see through the end of the project, and it was near conclusion at the final account stage where I was asked to look to take control and management of the project to see the final account in the last stages of the project.
Looking at the Decent Homes project, the Hidden Homes project and the door replacement programme, did any involve managing a large and complex refurbishment of a building?
No.
Thank you. The next topic I'm going to ask you questions about is training, Mr. Dunkerton.
Okay.
Now, first of all, before joining the TMO, did you receive any training on fire safety requirements in relation to high-rise buildings?
No.
Before joining the TMO, did you receive any training or have any experience of assessing the suitability of different materials and design features required for high-rise residential buildings?
No, I didn't.
Before joining the TMO, did you receive any training or have any experience of cladding on high-rise buildings and their relevant fire safety considerations?
No.
Did you receive any training from the TMO to allow you to perform your job on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project?
No.
Was there any specific fire safety training or advice provided to TMO employees about the lessons to be learned from the Lachnal house fire, which happened in 2009?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
During your time at the TMO, did you receive any training in relation to the potential fire risks from cladding on high-rise blocks following the fire at Lachnal in 2009?
No.
What was your understanding? First of all, were you aware of the fire in Lachnal House in 2009?
At that particular time, I'm not entirely sure. I am aware of it now, but at the time, I can't say if I was aware of it or not.
And when you say at the time, that's during the time of your employment by the TMO, is it?
Yes, yeah.
The next topic I'd like to discuss with you is your role in the refurbishment project. Now, could I ask you to turn to paragraph 12 of your first witness statement, and the reference for that is TMO quintuple 0 885 and /2. And at paragraph 12, you say this: the early stages of this project were managed by Mark Anderson, the Director of Asset Investment and Engineering at the time. I sat next to Mark at the main TMO office, known as the Hub, and he asked me to provide administrative help to help him on the project. In this respect, I was a project manager reporting directly to Mark Anderson. First of all, when did Mr. Anderson ask you for administrative help on the project?
I can't recall a specific conversation with him, so I can't recall exactly when he asked me. But I think it was more to do at the point when he asked was around the consultation period with the refurbishment of the scheme.
Okay. So would it be fair to assume that it was about spring 2012 or thereabouts?
Possibly, yes.
And what kind of administrative help did you provide to Mr. Anderson?
I helped Mark in some of, like I said, at the consultation period. I helped Mark with some of the development of some of the newsletters, some of the writing to residents, holding some of the consultations with Mark, setting up the equipment or the samples that were available, and filing some documents and just a general administration to assist in the refurbishment.
Who was the project manager in the sense of being the responsible decision maker within the TMO? So making decisions in relation to budgets, contractors, maintenance of the programme, etc.
I reported to Mark Anderson, and it's my belief that Mark Anderson was the main lead for that project.
Now, in the next paragraph of your witness statement, you say this in the second sentence, and it's at page 3 of your statement. With the Hidden Homes project, I was very much a project manager who was in control of the project, in that the consultants, contractors, and clerk of works on this project all reported to me. Conversely, with the Grenfell Tower project, I was predominantly there to provide administrative assistance to Mark Anderson in the early stages of the project. I never worked exclusively on this project and continued to progress the Hidden Homes project and fire door replacement programme at the same time. Now, first of all, when you first became involved in the Grenfell refurbishment project, how would you say your time was divided between that and the other programmes you were managing at the time?
The administration of the Grenfell Tower wasn't a full-time position then, and I wasn't constantly spending my time on the project. And similarly with the other projects, I was probably more involved with the Hidden Homes project at the time. The final accounts was just going through some procedures that didn't need full attention for the fire door replacement. So I managed my time between the three projects.
Can you give us an estimate, maybe in percentage terms, of how much of your time was spent on Grenfell compared to the other programmes you were involved in?
Possibly 60% on the Hidden Homes project, possibly say 30% or so on the the fire door project, and the rest was probably spent on the Grenfell administration for Mark on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project.
Thank you. Now, in your statement, you say that you were there to provide administrative assistance to Mr. Anderson in the early stages of the project. Did your role change at any point in the project?
Yes, I got a little, not to say changed, no, but I become a little bit more involved in the scheme, and certainly when Mark Anderson left the organisation, I was a little bit more involved.
So from January 2013 onwards until you left?
I wouldn't say onwards till I left. No, there was a small period when Mark had left the organisation. They hadn't appointed a director or asset manager for housing, or I forget the title or the role, but Peter Madison took the role over. In that small period of time, I took a little bit more of a proactive role in the project.
And can you give us an idea of what additional responsibility you performed during that period of time?
I wouldn't say necessarily responsibility, but I was a little bit more involved with some of the keeping the presentation for the TMO available, in attending some of the meetings, maybe a bit more on some of the documentation filing through, and being a little bit more involved in some of the aspects of the project.
Thank you. Now, at paragraph 15 of your first witness statement, which can be found at TMO quintuple 0885/3, you say this: as stated earlier, I was essentially administrative support to Mark Anderson in the time he worked on the Grenfell Tower regeneration project. I had no involvement in defining the scope or setting the budget for the regeneration project. I also had no involvement in the procurement of consultants, designers or contractors, nor did I have any input into decisions made about the design or materials used. Now, first of all, did anyone report to you during Mark Anderson's time at the TMO in relation to the Grenfell project?
Not directly to me, no.
Did you monitor the budget for the project?
No. When you say monitor, I followed the proceedings of the budget, but there wasn't authorisation to make decisions on the budget.
Okay. Were you responsible for giving any instructions to any contractors?
No.
Were you responsible for monitoring the work carried out by contractors?
No.
Were you responsible for ensuring that any work done was within budget?
Not necessarily, no.
Were you responsible for keeping the work on time?
Not necessarily, no.
Beyond helping with admin, during Mark Anderson's time at the TMO, what kind of decisions were you permitted to take?
I was more of a presence in some of the meetings, and I would take instructions or authorisation to and from the meeting to the TMO, predominantly Mark Anderson.
And who at the TMO was responsible for making the decisions about design and the materials used? Was that Mark Anderson?
Mark Anderson had an influence in it, yes.
And after Mr. Anderson left, who was responsible for making those types of decisions?
My belief is Peter Madison had quite heavy influence over the design of the project.
And when you say heavy influence, what do you mean by that? Could you give us an example?
Well, he had a good perspective of how he wanted to see the project proceed, and I think he had good influence over some of the decisions and the type of design for the building.
Now, at paragraph 16 of your first statement, you say this: by the time Mark Anderson resigned towards the end of 2012, it had become clear that there was a need for full-time management of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project. I was asked to take on more responsibility. However, I made it clear that I did not want to be a lead on the project. Why had the need for full-time management become clear at that point, so the end of 2012?
Because of the absence of Mark Anderson.
And what further responsibility were you asked to take on?
I don't recall any specific tasks to be taken on. I was just taking a bit more of a proactive role in being a presentation for the presence for the council, in particular attending meetings and past documentation for the scheme.
Did you interview for the full-time job left by Mr. Anderson?
For Mr. Anderson's role.
Yes, or at least a project management role.
I interviewed for a project management role. Yes, not for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project.
Mr. David Gibson has said that you interviewed for that role but were unsuccessful. Is that right?
I interviewed for a project manager's role. It wasn't a project manager's role for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project. They needed a project manager. Whether they decided to give the role to that project manager, I don't know, but the role was advertised for a project manager.
But it wasn't Grenfell?
Not as far as I'm aware. It might have been part of the project that they managed when I moved on, but the title and description of the job was for a project manager.
Were you told why you were unsuccessful?
I don't know. I'm not entirely sure why, no.
So you weren't told, or you can't remember?
I can't remember, and no, I can't remember.
Were you told by David Gibson or anyone else at the TMO what they were looking for in terms of the qualifications or experience for the project manager's role that was advertised?
I do recall having a conversation with David Gibson, yes. I can't recall what the conversation entailed, no.
Now, going back to your witness statement, your first one, you say this at paragraph 17. Peter Madison was then appointed as Director of Asset Investment and Engineering, and he had a very clear view of how he wanted to manage the project. Peter almost immediately took over any involvement I had in it. After he took over, did your role revert to primarily admin assistance?
Yes.
Can you help us? What view did Peter Madison have of how he wanted, first of all, to run the project?
I think Peter Madison wanted to have a bit more of a proactive and overall management of the scheme.
And what do you mean more proactive relative to what?
Well, instead of attending meetings, for example, some of the documentations, from some of the administration duties I was performing, he took more ownership of them duties.
And can you give us an idea, how did Mr. Madison's approach differ to that taken by Mr. Anderson?
I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure. I feel that he was probably a bit more hands-on than Mark, and he wanted to be more in control directly with the designers, whereas Mark would be a bit more, wasn't available as much as he was to go to some of the meetings.
Thank you. Now, I'm now going to turn to a different topic, and that is you're starting to work on the Grenfell project itself. Now, can we look at a document which is ART *06411, which ought to be the design team minutes from a meeting on the 24th of May 2012. And we see you there on the first page, second, identified as an attendee. Now, first of all, do you remember this meeting?
I don't, not specifically, no, but obviously I was there.
Can you remember whether this was the first meeting you attended in relation to Grenfell?
I'm not entirely sure.
Can you remember being briefed by anyone before you attended this meeting as to what the issues were and any position you were to articulate?
No, I can't.
Before you attended the meeting, did you know any of the members of the design team, for example?
Yes,
Did you know them all or just certain individuals?
just certain individuals.
Can you remember which individuals those were?
What, from the list I see in front of me, or just?
Yes.
Okay. I know Ricky Sams from the TMO. Alan Dawson, I was aware of. David Howe, I was aware of, and Chi Lim and Bruce Saunus.
Okay. And before the meeting, did you know the specific roles that those individuals were performing on the project?
Yes.
Now, if we scroll down the page, we'll see the first introduction is that of Alan Dawson as project manager, assisted by David Hale. Given that you described yourself earlier as having some function or role of the project manager, were you surprised that Mr. Dawson had been introduced as the project manager?
No, but I was a project manager for the TMO, not specifically for this project, and this is why they outsourced it to a multidisciplinary contractors, which was Appleyards at the time, and they changed the name to Artelia. And part of that multidisciplinary role will be project management.
And so, following from that, you had no reason to question whether Mr. Dawson was the project manager during that meeting?
No.
Now, can you see under the introduction itself, the fourth point says this: contractor procurement options to be evaluated by Appleyard Studio E. TMO board need to be persuaded that keeping with the IESE contractor under calc is in the project's best interests. Now, had you been briefed on the options for procuring contractors for the Grenfell refurbishment before this meeting?
Possibly, I'm not entirely sure.
Can you remember what the options were in relation to procurement?
Not specifically, no.
Looking at the particular phrase, quotes, the TMO board needs to be persuaded, close quotes, had the board expressed any view that you're aware of on the merits of any procurement options at that stage?
Not that I can recall. No.
Now, can we scroll down to the third page of this minute where it refers to initial scope? And it says the first priority was new windows and cladding to the whole tower. Now, can you remember who determined those priorities?
I'm not sure we can see that part of the document, can we? Or
If we scroll back up, perhaps. And you see
there you are.
under costs,
Yeah.
and then you've got Appleyard's prepared budget, initial scope identified on drawings and prioritised as follows. 1, new windows and cladding to the whole tower. Can you remember who determined those priorities?
No, I can't, sorry.
Did you have any say in determining those priorities?
No.
Can you remember when you were first aware that new windows and cladding were the TMO's first priority?
I can't specifically recall when I knew what was involved in the scheme. I do understand that part of the cladding and the windows were to form a thermal efficiency of the building, and that's probably the spec I did know. We need to make this building more thermally efficient to ensure that we can try and make energy savings, and that would fall in place with the windows and doors and the cladding.
Okay. But you can't remember
Not
month?
specifically, no, sorry.
Okay. Did RBKC have any involvement, to the best of your knowledge, in determining the priorities for the project at this or any later stage?
They possibly did, but not to my knowledge. I wasn't involved in discussions with them.
Okay. Thank you. Now, following that meeting, Bruce Soons emailed Mr. Anderson on the 12th of June 2012, and he attached a proposed fee letter. And if we could turn up that fee letter, it's a SEA quadruple 04562. And Mr. Soons says in that letter's opening sentence, "I'm writing to clarify our proposed fees and conditions of service for the proposed upgrade." And he sets out a suite of documents. Now, first of all, I'll just let you have a quick scan of that letter so you can familiarise yourself with it. Now, can you remember ever seeing that letter before?
Possibly, I'm not entirely sure.
Can you remember seeing or reading the documents that were attached?
Possibly, I'm not entirely sure, sorry.
Were you aware of what fees Studio E were proposing to charge at this stage, i.e. mid-June 2012?
Not specifically, no, I wasn't heavily involved in the procurement or negotiation of their fees at this stage.
Were you aware of the time at which they were proposing to pay those fees, they being the TMO?
Not that I recall. Possibly, there was a few design fees that were paid that I was aware of, but I can't recall if there was a stage payment plan.
Did Mark Anderson discuss this letter or the attachments with you?
Not that I recall.
Can you remember who decided that Studio E should be appointed?
No, I can't, sorry.
At the time, were you aware of what checks had been carried out to verify whether Studio E had the competence and the experience to do the proposed job?
No, I don't, sorry.
I'm now going to ask you to look at another letter, which is dated the 4th of July, and is a letter that you sent to residents, and we can find that at TMO 100499901. And I'll just let you refresh your memory.
Yeah.
Now, in the second sentence, you say this: "We have appointed Studio E as architects on our behalf, and they will be writing to you requesting access to your home so they can carry out internal surveys." Who confirmed Studio E's appointment to you for the purposes of writing this letter?
Mark Anderson advised me that they were working with Studio E, and I remember this. He's saying that we needed to write a letter to the residents to allow the residents the opportunity to let residents in, so it was introduced in Studio E.
This time, did you have any reason to look at the terms and conditions upon which Studio E had been appointed?
No, I was just asked to draft a letter to the residents.
And so far as you can remember, you wouldn't have looked at the suite of documents that Studio E had sent to Mark Anderson in his letter, in their letter.
I don't recall going through them documents, no.
Looking back now, are you able to help us as to whether anyone at the TMO checked the documents that Mr. Soons had sent to Mr. Anderson with his letter of the 12th of June?
I'm sure someone did, but I'm not specifically aware of who checked the documents.
Can we next look at the minutes for project meeting number 5, which was held on the 18th of July 2012, and the reference is ART quintuple 0168. And again, I'll just let you refresh your memory briefly. You were listed first in the list of attendees.
Yeah?
Do you recall the meeting at all?
Not specifically.
Can you remember receiving the minutes?
I received quite a few minutes from most of the meetings that I would file and keep on record.
Did you read minutes when they came through to you?
I would have done, yes.
And did you pass the minutes to Mark Anderson?
I would have done, yes.
Did you update him following the meeting?
That was part of my role that he said, that, as I said earlier, that if he was unable to attend some of these meetings, I would attend on his behalf and then give him a briefing what the discussions were.
Now, if we can scroll down, you'll see under the heading Appointments, it states, A. Dawson gave verbal confirmation that all appointments are approved. However, the TMO would like to subcontract all consultants via Studio E up until stage D, with the total fee up until stage D not exceeding 174k, which is the overdue threshold for requiring work to be tendered. This will probably mean deferring some fees post-stage D. Now, did the reference to deferring fees mean that the appointees would be paid by the contractor after novation for work that they had done for the TMO before the novation?
I can't recall, sorry. I wasn't involved heavily with the fee negotiation.
Did that mean, to the extent that you can now recall, that the actual cost of the services required under the contract with the TMO was expected to be more than £174,000?
Sorry, not that I recall. I wasn't involved in some of the fee negotiations.
Can you remember who at the TMO gave the instruction in relation to the structure of payment of fees?
As I say, the project was managed by Mark Anderson, so I'm going to take the assumption that Mark Anderson would have made the agreements.
Okay. Can I next turn to an email dated the 27th of July 2012, and the reference for that is ART quintuple 0981. Now, there are a number of bullet points set out in that email, but I'll let you just refresh your memory briefly before I ask you questions in relation to it.
Okay.
Now, you were copied into this email. Do you agree that at this stage, so end of July 2012, Studio E were amending the figures to ensure that they fell below £174,000 by applying a 50% deferment?
No, I can't. I'm not entirely sure what their intentions were, sorry.
Now, can you remember any discussion of the deferment arrangements or not?
No, I wasn't, like I say, I wasn't involved in the fee negotiation, sorry.
Can you remember raising any questions with Mark Anderson regarding the structure of fees and payment for Studio E?
Not that I recall.
Now, I'm now going to turn to a new topic, and that's Studio E's terms and conditions. Now, we looked at the email from Bruce Soons to Mark Anderson, which attached Studio E's terms and conditions, and they can be found at SEA quadruple 04561. And that's the email. Now, as part of your admin responsibilities, were you required to record and retain the project's contractual documents?
Yes, I would have been part of filing the contractual documents.
Now, as part of your responsibility for filing them, do you know whether anyone at the TMO signed Studio E's terms and conditions during 2012?
Sorry, I can't recall. I'm not entirely sure.
Would you have been responsible for making sure that contractual documents had been signed or not?
No.
Who would have been?
I would have thought the TMO's legal team or the procurement team.
Can you cast any light on why the terms and conditions were not signed by the TMO during 2012?
No, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Can we turn to another document now, which is at SEA quadruple 09823. Now, this is among the suite of documents that were sent by Mr. Soons, and it is hopefully, yes, the project data document. Now, on page 5, it lists the project appointments. Now, working down from the top, Studio E, or just or the second entry, I should say. Studio E are listed as being the lead consultant, lead designer, and architect as designer. Did that reflect your understanding of Studio E's role at the time?
Yes, my understanding was they were the lead designer, yes.
And we'll see at the very first entry is Appleyards as the CDM coordinator and also as the contract administrator, the employer's agent and cost consultant. Again, did that accord with your understanding of the role at the time?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, can we look at a separate document, which is at SEA quadruple 9824? And if we turn to page 4 within that document, we have here a definition of various roles. And the first definition is that of project manager, which says preparing the client's initial statement of project objectives, taking into account the client's core operations and identifying constraints, then establishing the requirement for professional skills, including development of the brief, procedure and program management, and legal, insurance and financial services. Can you help us? Who were carrying out those jobs for the TMO on the project?
For this particular project, at the time, my understanding is Mark Anderson was taking on these responsibilities.
So all of them?
As far as I'm aware, but again, we do discharge some duties, and one of those would be to a multidisciplinary contractor, which was Appleyards.
Can you remember now, going through each element of the functions set out here, which ones Mark Anderson performed and which ones Appleyards performed?
Yes.
Can you help us with which ones Mr. Anderson performed?
He preparing the client's initial statement of the project objectives, taking into account the client's core operations and identifying constraints.
And would he have been responsible for establishing the requirement for professional skills and development of the brief, etc.?
Yes, yes.
Would he have been responsible for identifying the roles of client reps and stakeholders?
Yes, he would be part of that, yes.
Managing the appointment of consultants and specialists?
Part of it, yes. Because I say part of that will be appointing a multidisciplinary contractor, and they would then give you some advice and guidance on other types of consultants to appoint to the project.
Thank you. Issuing information, decisions, approvals and instructions to the lead consultant, would that be Mr. Anderson or someone else?
He was part of that, but I think when Appleyards were appointed, I think they were more in charge of that duty.
Implementing of any feasibility studies and or options appraisals required? Mr. Anderson or Appleyards?
I would say Appleyards.
Developing and maintaining a project strategy?
Again, Appleyards, I suggest.
Managing development of the brief and overseeing its implementation?
I would say that's a dual purpose with Appleyards and Mark Anderson.
Okay, if we can scroll down slightly further so we can see the balance of this page. Identifying project procedures, would that be Appleyards or Mr. Anderson?
I'd say Appleyards.
And the penultimate one, preparing and maintaining the master cost plan, etc.?
Again, I would say that would be Appleyards.
And finally, monitoring performance and activity, etc.
Yeah, I'd say Appleyards.
Thank you. Now, we're now going to turn on to a separate topic which flows from that, which is Appleyards and Artelia's terms and proposals. Can we turn to an email sent by Simon Cash to Mark Anderson on the 2nd of May 2012, which can be found at ART quadruple 6309. And if that could be amplified slightly. It says, please find attached our proposal for the provision of quantity surveying, employer's agent and CDM coordinator services. A hard copy has gone in the post to you today. First of all, did you ever see that email? You're not copied in on the face of it.
I can't recall seeing that email.
We now turn to a separate email, and that's Mark Anderson's email to Alan Dawson, sent some 3.5 months later on the 21st of August 2012, which is at ART quadruple 6259. Now, you were copied into that. You're the last named individual on the list. And it stated that the appointment of Appleyards was confirmed on the basis of the 2nd of May proposal. First of all, is that a fair reading of that email?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that at this point, you and the TMO understood Artelia's role to be limited to quantity surveying, employer's agent, and CDM coordinator?
That's what it says in the letter, but I can't specifically say I remember that.
And that the balance of the project management role was partly done in-house by the TMO and partly done along the lines you've identified by Appleyards?
Yes, that's my understanding, yes.
Can we now move forward in time to a meeting on the 6th of June 2013, and the minutes are at ART quadruple 9106. And if we could look at item 1.1 on that first page, please. And could I invite you to read 1.1?
Sorry, do you want me to read it?
Yeah, just read it to yourself, not out loud.
Okay.
Now, would you agree that refers to the approval of a revised project brief?
Yes, that's what it says.
Now, can we turn to the revised brief, which is at ART quadruple 1219, and in particular page 2? And if that could be amplified, particularly the top half, thank you. Under contract and procurement, the third paragraph, last sentence says this: Appleyards, who had previously acted as EA/QS, will take on a full PM/EA role in addition to their QS responsibilities and will fulfill the lead consultant role. Now, first of all, do you remember reading that revised brief?
I can't recall reading this in detail, no.
Do you remember receiving it?
No, I can't recall receiving it.
To the best of your recollection, were you expecting Appleyards to take on the full project management role at that stage, so June 2013?
Yes.
Was there any discussion between you, Mr. Madison, and Mr. Gibson about Appleyards taking on that full role at that time?
I can't recall.
Can you not remember whether there was a conversation, or can you not remember the substance of any conversation?
I can't remember if there was a conversation.
Thank you. Now can I turn to a separate topic, which is the competence of the pre-contract design team. Now, first of all, would you describe the Grenfell refurbishment project as complex in that it was major, lengthy, multifaceted, which involved overcladding and replacing windows of a high-rise residential block with residents in situ?
Yes, I would.
Because of its complexity, do you think you had the required experience for the role you carried out on that project?
I was carrying out administration roles. I was capable of carrying out administration.
Given that, I assume, but please say if you disagree, that you wouldn't have considered it part of your role to have verified the competence of contractors seeking to be engaged. Is that fair?
Not the involvement I had at the project. No, I wouldn't have had that responsibility.
At the TMO, whose responsibility would it have been to have verified the competence and experience of contractors seeking to be retained?
At this particular time, it would have been Mark Anderson or Peter Madison. They both had full active roles on the scheme.
To the best of your knowledge, do you remember whether anyone within the TMO carried out checks on the competence of the pre-contract team for the Grenfell project?
I'm sure there was, but I wasn't part of that, so I'm not sure.
So you can't say one way or the other?
I can't say one way or the other. I'm only assuming that Mark Anderson or Peter Madison would have took that responsibility.
Did you ask if anyone at the TMO had carried out such checks, or did you assume it would be done and didn't ask?
I just assumed it would be done.
Was it your understanding that Studio E and Appleyards had been appointed to the Grenfell project because they'd worked on the Calc project?
No, not. I was advised with my mark. As the letter said earlier, that we've appointed Studio E. I'm not entirely. I know they were part of the Calc project. I'm not sure how they were asked to manage the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower.
Okay, so you can't speak to the reasons for their appointment?
No.
Okay. I'm now moving on to a separate topic, which is the a decision to re-tender. And could we look first, please, at ART quintuple 0637. Now, this is an email from Laura Johnson of RBKC to Cliff Thomas at Leadbitter, dated the 3rd of January 2013. Could I ask you to read the third paragraph of this to yourself?
Sorry, the third paragraph,
The
or
third
number,
paragraph, which
number
starts-
3.
Yeah, there was originally a total of around.
Okay.
Now, you're not included in the distribution list for this email. Have you seen this email before today? Can you remember?
No, I don't recall seeing this email.
Were you aware of the time of the view within RBKC that Leadbitter should not be appointed to the Grenfell project?
No, I wasn't aware they weren't going to be appointed to the Grenfell Tower project. I was aware that Peter Madison had intentions to re-procure this project.
And that would have been after this email was sent. This email is dated the 3rd of January 2013.
Possibly, yes.
Now, Mark Anderson was copied into this email. Do you know whether he thought that Leadbitter should not be appointed to the Grenfell project?
No, I don't recall Mark saying they shouldn't be appointed.
Do you remember any discussion with him regarding the continuing role of Leadbitter in the project?
No, not that they were going to be removed from the project, but there was negotiations over some of their costings for the project.
But nothing more than that?
Nothing more than that.
Thank you. Now, could I ask you to turn to the minutes of a project review meeting on the 11th of January 2013, and they can be found at TMO 008473332. Now, just looking at the list of attendees at the top, the first one is Mike Hallimond. He was there for the TMO. What role did he have on the project?
Mike Hallimond was effectively who I used to report to, and in the TMO was like my effectively line management. But on this particular project, as far as I'm aware, he had very limited involvement.
Now, looking at the first paragraph of the minute, it says that Mark Anderson had left. A difficult question. Can you remember a more precise date when he left in January 2013?
No, sorry.
Okay. Now, if we can scroll down to item 3, which
I'm
was
sorry, Mr. Kinnear, perhaps I'm a bit slow on the uptake. That was the first The first of those numbered paragraphs, was it?
Yes. And Mike informed
Oh,
Alan
yes, I'm
that
sorry,
Mark-
yes.
Yeah.
All right, my fault. Thank you.
Sorry, sir. Can we scroll down to item 3, which is Leadbitter's estimated cost? Thank you. And it says there that the Leadbitter's estimated cost being £2 million higher than Appleyard's Stage D cost plan. And if we look down at paragraph 5, there's a reference to advising TMO on the validity of the Leadbitter's cost plan to allow consideration of reprocuring. Now, would you agree that the TMO was considering reprocurement of the project at this point, i.e., 11th of January 2013?
There was discussions of reprocurement. I think that no decision had been made at that point, as far as I'm aware.
Can you remember, given it was the 11th of January 2013, who within the TMO had suggested that reprocurement ought to be considered?
I can't specifically recall anyone saying that. I do know Peter Madison was involved in some of the reprocurement later.
Can you remember whether Mark Anderson ever raised it with you before he left in January 2013?
Not that I recall.
Before Mr. Anderson left, did he give you a handover briefing? Can you remember?
No, not that I'm aware.
Do you know whether he gave Mr. Madison a handover briefing?
I'm not sure.
Now, in your first witness statement, you refer to a TMO programme board meeting that you attended on the 17th of January 2013. And if I might ask you to turn to paragraph 42 of that statement, and the reference is TMO quintuple 0885/8. Now, paragraph 42, you state, amongst other things, I attended a programme board meeting in which we discussed the £2 million overspend on the project. And at paragraph 43, you go on to say this: while I cannot recall this particular meeting, I'm confident that I would have been updating the executive team in the absence of Mark Anderson. I do recall that the pricing specifications put forward by Appleyards and Leadbitters were £2 million apart, which was very concerning. With the benefit of that aspect of your statement, could I ask you again whether you remember whether Mr. Anderson had any discussions with you regarding procurement options before he left?
I don't recall anything specific about procurement, so I'm not entirely sure.
Now, could I ask you to turn to the minutes from that project board meeting on the 17th of January 2013, which are at TMO 100499908. First of all, the programme board is for the senior executive team at the TMO, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Grenfell is at item 3, which is on the 3rd page. And may I just ask you to read to yourself the first paragraph to refresh your memory?
Okay.
Now, looking at what is said in that first paragraph, was it the case that because the cladding costs for Calc were being reviewed, the proposed cladding costs for Grenfell would also be reviewed?
Possibly, yes. I do know there were various different options that were considered.
Was there any discussion at this meeting about whether the cladding would be too expensive and should be dropped from the proposed works? Can you remember?
No, sorry, I can't recall.
Can you give us now your recollection of the gist of the discussions regarding the cladding during the course of that programme team meeting?
I can't recall specific discussions of the cladding. No, sorry.
Okay. Can I ask you to scroll down and look at the 3rd paragraph under this heading, which starts, we would have to go back to RBKC, and you see in particular the second sentence says, clarification required on whether we had to have the same standards as those for the Calc project. Now, first of all, was that clarification sought by the programme board?
I think we're missing a key point here. The most cost-effective. The key point of the project was about thermal efficiency of the building, and I think we was looking at what would provide the best thermal efficiency for the building, whether it would be cladding or some other types of insulation.
Can you recall who prompted the request for clarification?
No,
Which
sorry,
member of the board?
I can't recall.
Was the effective suggestion that the TMO didn't need the standard to be as high as for Grenfell as it had been for Calc?
No, not that I recall.
Were you able to give the board the clarification that they sought after the meeting?
I would have done, but I don't recall. I would have fed back information from the meeting.
Okay. Can we turn to the next paragraph, which notes that you would keep the executive team updated on progress on getting back to the £9.4 million budget? Can you remember whether you did update them?
As I said, I may have done. I can't recall a specific conversation with them.
Now, Mr. Madison started at the TMO on the 21st of January 2013. Did you brief him on the state of the project when he arrived?
Yes, I would have done.
Can you remember now the gist of what you told him about?
No, not entirely. No, sorry.
Would you have covered procurement options, can you remember?
No, I would have covered where the project was and the cost difference within the project. Some of the consultation processes we've already gone through with some of the residents. Not entirely sure I went through the procurement stage with Peter Madison.
When you say you're not entirely sure, are you saying that you can't remember?
I am saying I can't remember, yes.
Can you remember whether you had any specific discussion regarding cladding and cladding choices and cost?
I can't remember the conversations in that detail, no.
Okay. Now, could I ask you now to turn to an email you received from Bruce Soons on the 28th of January 2013, which is at TMO 00848941. And the first sentence of that email says, "I'm writing to follow up our conversation on Friday regarding outstanding fees." Now, take it from me, the 28th was a Monday, so the Friday before was 25th of January. Do you recall that meeting? Or the conversation, I should say.
So can you repeat your question, please?
Yes, of course. You'll see in the first line of the email, it says, "I'm writing to follow up our conversation on Friday regarding outstanding fees." Do you recall that conversation regarding outstanding fees?
No, not specifically.
Can you remember whether it was a conversation on a phone or a meeting?
I'm sorry, I can't recall.
Okay. Can you recall any meeting between you, Peter Madison, and Bruce Soons at this time in January regarding outstanding fees?
I had a few meetings. I can't recall specifics and discussions in the meeting, sorry.
Now, if we turn to the next paragraph, the third sentence states, "The design team agreed to defer half their stage D fee to ensure the total cost to KCTMO fell below the overdue threshold for services. The spreadsheet implies that the team was sub-consulted to Studio E, but this was not the case, and all consultants' fees were paid direct." Now, by this stage, were you aware of the meaning and consequence of deferring fees to fall below the overdue threshold for service contracts?
I think that had already been agreed prior to my involvement in the scheme. I'm just repeating, I think, what was already said earlier in someone else's statement.
Okay. So you had no specific knowledge of your own regarding the arrangements and the rationale for those arrangements?
No, as I said, I wasn't involved in negotiation of the fees.
Did you give any briefing to Mr. Madison regarding the arrangements for the payment of consultants' fees generally?
I would have explained to him, as far as I knew, what the arrangements were.
Would you have discussed the overdue threshold during those discussions with Mr. Madison?
I can't recall, sorry. I'm sure that he would have seen this email.
When you say you're sure he, Mr. Madison, would have seen this email, why are you confident of that?
No, I'm not.
So if you were able to brief Mr. Madison regarding the arrangements, were you first of all aware of the importance of the ODU threshold?
I'm aware of the ODU process, yes.
And are you aware of what it means to fall above the ODU threshold?
I'm aware, yes.
And what are you aware of? What's the consequence of the value of a contract being above the threshold?
There's a certain value that that the project needs to then go to the, I think it stands for the Open Journal European Union, and then you advertise it for other companies to put their bids forward.
Before your involvement in Grenfell, had you had any involvement in any public procurement process?
Yes.
Okay. How many?
On a smaller scale for previous organisations, yes. I can't give you an example of how many.
And you would have been aware that if the value of a contract was above the threshold, there had to be a competitive exercise undertaken by the procuring authority?
Yes.
So can I take it from that you'd be aware that arranging matters so that the value of the contract was below the threshold would mean there would be no competitive exercise undertaken?
As I say, this negotiations of the fees was arranged prior to my involvement, so I was just repeating what had already been said, I think, by Bruce in the previous statement.
In your conversations with Mr. Madison at this time, did he ask you what checks had been done to verify the competence and experience of, first of all, Studio E and the rest of the design team?
I can't recall having any conversations with Peter. I'm not entirely sure, sorry.
Can you remember any conversation with Mr. Madison in which he raised any concerns that there had been no reprocurement or no tendering exercise in relation to the retention of Studio E?
I can't recall having any conversations with Peter, sorry.
Now, in the third paragraph of that email, Mr. Soons gives a summary of the history of Studio E's work, and he makes a reference to value engineering. And he says, Leadbitter have indicated the project needs significant value engineering to be affordable. What did you understand Leadbitters to be suggesting? Cost-cutting or value engineering?
My understanding was value engineering.
Now, Mr. Soons continues on the issue of outstanding fees in his email of the 5th of February 2013 to Alan Dawson, and that can be found at TMO 00848959. Now, both you and Mr. Madison were copied into the email. We can see from the first paragraph that it appears that you had a conversation with Mr. Soons about holding back on making further submissions to the planners at RBKC. Do you recall that conversation regarding submissions to the planners?
No, I don't, sorry.
No. Can you remember why a decision had been taken to hold back on further submissions at that time?
No, I can't recall why we would do that, sorry.
Mr. Soons mentions the possible cost to undertake value engineering, which sounds inevitable. Was it your understanding that a value engineering exercise was likely to be embarked upon at that stage?
Yes, we were looking at various options for the design projects, yes.
Right, can I now turn on to a separate topic which follows through on these various value engineering matters? And can we now start by looking at what you say at paragraph 47 of your first witness statement, which is at TMO quintuple 0885, page 9, and you say this: I have been shown documents recording that by 23rd of May 2013, Appleyards had begun to look at our procurement options as Leadbitters were proving difficult to work with. The value engineering exercise had begun by this stage, but I had no involvement in it. Now, before we come on to the questions, can you look, please, at an email sent by you on the 27th of February 2013 to Alan Dawson, which is at TMO 008492555, and in particular pages 14 to 15 within this chain. And we have here at the bottom your email, 27th of February. And if we go to page 15, the second substantive paragraph says, if we looked at VE, I suggest the following. And then you set out a number of possibilities. I'll let you refresh your memory just by reading those briefly.
Yes, I'm aware of this.
Okay. Would you agree that this email indicates at the very least you had considered views on the scope of the proposed value engineering exercise?
Yes, I'd put forward some suggestions.
And on what matters, what research had you done to help you identify these proposed measures? Had you discussed these measures with anyone beforehand?
Yes, I think we was in discussion with Chi Lim about some of the design options for the scheme and the overall project itself. And in particular, there was some discussions around the garages, refurbishment of the garages, whether it was necessary for the scheme or not, and various other options as well.
Now, can you give the panel an idea of what the extent of your involvement was at this stage, so late February 2013, in consideration of value engineering? The first element appears to be discussions regarding proposals. What other matters in terms of its consideration were you involved in?
As I say, I was more administration. I would put forward some suggestions and my own thoughts of what we could look at as options for value engineering.
Did you discuss any of those options with Mr. Madison before you sent the email to Alan Dawson?
I'm sure there have been discussions with Peter Madison around the designs of the scheme, yes.
Would you have put forward these individual proposals to Mr. Madison before you committed them to an email to Mr. Dawson?
I think it's possibly the other way around, that Peter may have said to me, these are options that we can look at, and then I, again, it's my administration duties, I would send this out.
Now, looking at the list of things that ought to be considered, a lot involves removal of works from the project. Is that a fair overview?
Yes, there was consideration of removing some elements of the design.
Now, would you agree with this proposition that a value engineering exercise promotes the substitution of materials and methods with less expensive alternatives, but without sacrificing functionality?
I wouldn't say that was specifically the aspects of the value engineering. I would say, as it suggests there, what can we afford to do and remove items from the design to bring the project back in line with the available budget.
So, given that answer, what these proposals look like is more akin to cost-cutting rather than value engineering, isn't it, Mr. Dunkerton?
Not exactly, no. I would disagree with that. I would say that this was looking at what we could afford to do within the budget and looking at areas that weren't necessary to achieve the outcomes.
Now, one of the things you suggest is look at alternative material for cladding. That's the second bullet point. Was that your suggestion, or was it from Mr. Madison?
I think that was already muted within the project team, as far as I'm aware, and there were the various different valuable types of samples available to residents and the TMO to look at the cladding.
Can you remember who'd suggested it first of all in the meetings you'd attended?
No, sorry, I can't recall who suggested it.
Was it someone at the TMO, or was it someone from the contractors?
I'm not entirely sure, sorry.
Did you or Mr. Madison, or indeed anyone at the TMO, have a particular alternative material in mind?
No, not particularly, no.
Did you discuss any particular material with Mr. Gibson or Mr. Madison before the email was sent?
Not that I recall.
Now, might I ask you to look at a separate email chain which was sent on the day before, so on the 26th of February 2013, and we can find those at ART *0 5911. And if we can go to page 3, scroll down, And you'll see, I'll just let you reread that email before I ask you questions on it.
Okay.
Now, the chain starts off with that you see Mr. Dawson asking Studio E in the second paragraph of that email for, quotes, a radical rethink of the scope/spec, close quote. And if we scroll up to the bottom of the first page of this chain, we hopefully see a response from Mr. Soons at 11:48, where he says it's not really possible to rethink without further information. He then lists targets for savings. If we go to page 2, the second of which is, close quote, to quote, change zinc cladding material to something cheaper. I think planning will need a sweetener to swallow this, perhaps copper, ceramic, terracotta, or more glass at low level. Now, did you discuss that suggestion with Mr. Madison or Mr. Gibson that you can remember?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Would you have discussed these type of suggestions with either of those gentlemen?
I'm sure these discussions would have come up, yes.
And if the email had come from Mr. Soons prompting this, would that in all likelihood have prompted a conversation between you, Mr. Madison or Mr. Gibson?
Sorry,
If Mr. Soons had made suggestions regarding particular alternatives, would that have prompted you to have a conversation with Mr. Madison or Gibson regarding those alternatives?
it wouldn't have prompted me to have it. I'm sure that the discussions were had. I don't recall having specific discussions with following this email.
Would that, mindful that this email correspondence was on the day before you responded to Alan Dawson on the 27th of February looking for alternative material for cladding, would it have been this conversation that had prompted that email, the suggestion of looking at alternatives?
Yes, part of value engineering, we was looking at all aspects of the design.
Can you remember now whether aluminium was considered at this stage as an alternative?
There was various different products available at the time, yes.
Okay. Now, can I ask you to go back to paragraph 46 of your witness statement? And you say this, quotes, by April 2013, alternative cladding options to zinc were being circulated. I've been shown emails that I was copied into between Bruce Soons and Peter Madison, which record that several aluminium composite material, ACM, cladding options were being circulated as samples. While I do not recall this correspondence, I'm confident that I was never asked my opinion about the composition of the cladding, nor did I offer it. Now, you refer in your witness statement to an email sent by Bruce Soons on the 17th of April 2013, and could we go to that, which is at TMO 100002602. Thank you. And if we can go to the second page, and you'll see at the top half the heading Samples, and then it says, going beyond the meeting, I think it is worth circulating the samples we have been collecting of alternative cladding options to zinc. So this is an email from Mr. Soons. And then he lists a number of different ACM options. Now, can you remember, was there any discussion about what ACM was, first of all?
No, not that I recall.
Is it fair to assume that all of the options set out in this email were being discussed as cheaper alternatives to zinc at the time?
I wouldn't necessarily say cheaper, but saying there were options available.
But is it fair to assume that those options were being discussed at the time?
Yes, ACM was discussed at the time.
Was there any discussion as to why those alternatives were cheaper than zinc?
Not that I recall.
Can you recall any discussion of the fire safety aspects of these proposed alternatives?
Not that I recall.
Thank you. Right, can I now turn on to a separate topic, which is a recommendation made by Mr. Madison on the 25th of March 2013 to the Programme Board. And for that purpose, can we go to TMO 1003883? which are the minutes of the TMO Programme Board meeting of the 25th of March. We see there, under the first item, that yourself, Mr. Madison and Mr. Gibson attended for this, i.e. the Grenfell Tower item and the Hidden Homes agenda items. And if we can scroll down, it was stated in the penultimate sentence at the bottom of that page, there has been no clear audit trail to explain how decisions were made. First of all, was that a concern that Peter Madison had raised with you before the meeting?
I don't recall having that conversation with Peter.
Do you recall having that conversation with anyone at the TMO?
No, not that I recall.
Can you recall whether Mr. Madison felt that the absence of a clear audit trail was your responsibility in some way?
No, I can't see that you're saying it's my responsibility.
Was he being critical of Mr. Anderson, for example?
Not that I'm aware. You may have to ask him.
Can you help us as to whether the problem of the absence of a clear audit trail, how that was resolved?
No, sorry, I can't recall.
Do you have any recollection of anyone expressing a concern about the absence of the clear audit trail, of raising it with you?
I can't recall. It's time back now. I can't recall any specifics around the around that conversation. Sorry.
Can we turn over the page? And it's the fourth complete paragraph on that page, which starts with the word procurement. It says procurement would be an issue, as the project was recommended to board on the basis that we're doing it this way for efficiency savings. Can you help us? What was the anticipated issue with the procurement that was being discussed?
I can't recall that far back. Sorry.
Can you remember whether there was any discussion as to the basis upon which Mr. Anderson had recommended the procurement should be conducted?
No, sorry, I can't recall.
Can you remember any discussion regarding the basis of the various procurement options proposed by Mr. Anderson? Did you have those conversations with him, for example?
No, like I say, there was discussion about the re-procurement, but not the current procurement, as I recall.
Okay. Now, looking at the next paragraph in these minutes, it says, and I quote, Peter has spoken to Laura Johnson about the present situation and also mentioned it to the board, so hopefully there will not be a huge issue if we say we need to start again. Paul is working with the architects to look at an alternative. What discussions did you have with Studio E about the prospects of starting again?
I do recall there was consideration of talking to Happy Yards of what our options were if there was consideration of re-procuring the project.
Do you remember whether Laura Johnson at RBKC was involved in any of these discussions regarding the re-procurement of the Grenfell project?
No, I can't recall, sorry.
Do you recall ever being in any meeting between Peter Madison and Laura Johnson in relation to which re-procurement was discussed?
Not off the top, no, I can't recall, sorry.
The paragraph in the minutes refers to the present situation. Can you remember what Mr. Madison might have said about the present situation?
No, I can't recall the conversation.
Now, if we can go down two further paragraphs in this minute, which starts, the recommendation from Peter is for us to re-procure. Now, is it right to say that at this stage, so March 2013, the TMO had not received the breakdown of Ledbetter's proposed costs?
I think that's as far as I'm aware, yes.
Can you explain why, therefore, Peter Madison was recommending re-procurement without the benefit of Ledbetter's proposed costs?
No, I'm sorry, you'll have to ask Peter.
Thank you. The final paragraph on that page says this: it needs to be thoroughly explained that Ledbetters are trying to overcharge. Now, am I right in understanding that you'd been told that Ledbetters and Appleyards were £2 million apart?
Yes, I was aware there's a difference in cost, yes.
And that Alan Dawson was saying not to place too much weight on that difference at this stage. Is that fair?
I don't recall Alan saying that, no.
Okay. Would it help if I took you to a project minutes to refresh your memory?
Please.
Could we go to ART quadruple 08469? And page 1, and I think paragraph 4 on that page. Can you remember him saying anything along the lines of not putting too much weight on the difference between the two figures at that stage?
I'm not entirely sure I remember Alan saying that to me, sorry.
Well, going back to the programme board minutes, which is at 10038883, and going back to the bottom of the second page, and you'll see there lead bitters are trying to overcharge. Can you remember who was suggesting that lead bitters were trying to overcharge?
No, sorry. I know that their costs were high. Whether there was consideration that it was overcharged or not, I don't recall.
Now, I want to, if we can turn away from that document, can we now turn to your email to Alan Dawson, the 27th of February 2013? Now, we've looked at that before, but can we go back to that email chain, which is at TMO 00849255? And if I might ask the Opus operator to take us to page 18. And we see at the bottom an email from Alan Dawson, the date, the 26th of February 2013, sent at 10:55. And if we can go on to page 19, he says in the first sentence, refers to a significant deficit between the approved cost plan and lead bitters. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we go further up that email chain to page 13, as you go slightly further up to page 12, you have an email from you, and then there are further emails in the chain. If we go up to page 9, and it's an email you sent on the 27th of March 2013, which says, we would also like cost analysis if the TMO re-procured this project to include abortive fees and outstanding fees, additional fees, etc. Now, is that something you decided to request, or was it something you had been told to request?
Yeah, I would have sent that under instruction from the senior management team.
Senior management team, was it Mr. Madison, Mr. Gibson? Are you able to remember?
No, sorry, I can't remember who, but I wouldn't have give that type of instruction without some senior management giving me guidance.
Okay. If we can stay with this chain but move further up to page 5 to an email from Robert Powell on the 3rd of April. Now, there we go. He refers to a paper on VE options and says that he will issue a status report next week. And if we go up to page 4 of this email chain, it's your response of the 10th of April. And then, if we can get the full email, brought up on the screen if that's possible. And you open by saying, just to confirm our, quotes, requirements, close quotes. When you say our requirements, who at the TMO had specified them?
I'm not entirely sure who would have given me that, but it would have either been Peter or, sorry, it's jumped around a bit. It would have been Peter or Mark Anderson.
At this stage, 10th of April 2013, it would have been Peter Madison, wouldn't it?
Yes, sorry, the dates of who left and when Peter got involved, I'm not entirely sure, so you may be right, yes.
Well, Mr. Anderson left in January 2013.
January 20, yeah, okay.
So we're now April 2013. So given your previous answer, I'm assuming it would have been Mr. Madison who would have given you those instructions.
Possibly, yes.
Now, Mr. Powell responds substantively on the 10th of April, and if we go up to the first page of this email chain, an email he sent to you and Simon Cash, and if we go on to page 2, and if I can ask you, I'll just let you briefly refresh your memory of that email.
Okay.
Now, in the second bullet point, it says this: there are similar questions over the design team whose fee claims raise a number of procedural questions with regards to proper procurement. Now, did you understand that to suggest that there had not been a proper procurement of the design team?
No, sorry, I'd like to say I wasn't part of the previous procurement of the scheme.
Now, looking at the third bullet point, it says there are a number of legal and procedural matters which will require some legal input to resolve regarding the ability to usurp the incumbent contractor, should that be the desired course of action. Now, assuming that to usurp means to sack, was sacking Leadbitter's TMO's preferred option at that point?
I'd say Peter Madison would probably be best to answer that.
Do you remember any discussion regarding?
I remember options available about re-procurement, but no decision had been made at the time.
Okay. Can we turn to the fifth bullet point, which says this: there does seem to be a fundamental disconnect with the advised construction budget of 8.5 million and the figures we are estimating. When the disparity between our figures and those which Leadbitters appear to be entrenched on is considered, it suggests that a fundamental rethink is required. Now, did you discuss that point with either Mr. Madison or Mr. Gibson or both of them?
I'm sure they would have. I don't recall a specific conversation, but I'm sure there would have been some discussions.
Can you remember what their response was?
No, sorry.
Do you remember at this stage any discussion about whether the TMO could afford to proceed with the refurbishment project as planned?
There were discussions about re-procurement to see if we can get different contractors to provide better options. That was one discussion. Like I say, it was on the table. All options were available at that time.
And you're quite certain when you say at that time, April 2013?
Yes, it would have been the time when this email was around.
Now, you attended a TMO capital investment meeting on the 11th of April 2013. And if we go to the minutes, which are TMO 100002688. Now, Grenfell is at item 3.5 on page 2. Where it's minuted thus. At the bottom there, Appleyards have advised the TMO it would be beneficial to value engineer the scheme to bring within 8.5 million construction budget. My first question is, who proposed the 8.5 million construction budget? To the best of your recall.
I'm not entirely sure how the budget was set, sorry.
Is it correct or fair to say that the budget was set at 8.5 million at that meeting?
Not I recall, sorry.
Okay. Can we now turn to the Artelia status report of the 23rd of April 2013, and that can be found at ART *09101.
Mr. Kinnear, how are we getting on?
This would be a good time for a break, because I'm just about to start a new topic.
Well, that's what I wondered.
Yeah.
Well, then I think it would. Mr. Dunkerton, we have a short break during each session, and this would be a good time to take it. So we're going to stop. We'll resume at 11:45, please.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? So would you like to give the usher, please? quarter to 12, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Dunkerton to come back in, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dunkerton?
Fine, thank you.
Ready to carry on?
Thank you, yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Ms. Dunkerton, whilst you pour yourself a glass of water, we were about to look at the Artelia status report of the 23rd of April 2013, and that is at ART quadruple 09101. Excuse me. First of all, do you remember receiving this report?
Yes, I think I remember seeing this.
And was this the report that you expected to receive following Robert Powell's email of the 10th of April that we looked at before the break?
Yes, I would have thought this is a report.
Would you have read that report?
Yes, I'm sure I'd have read this.
Could we go to internal page 14 within this report? So it needs to go on 4 more pages. Thank you. And we see in the bottom half of that page a number of numbered points. But the overall recommendation is to stick with lead bitters. I'll let you read that material in the bottom half.
Sorry, what can you... What,
Yes,
what
can
am
you
I-
look at the bottom half that is set out on the screen? So whilst this exercise is still underway.
Oh, I see, okay.
Just let you refresh your memory.
Okay, thank you.
Would you agree that the thrust of the recommendation is to stick with lead bitters?
That's what it says, yes.
And if we could now turn to page 25. Thank you. And the second paragraph down from the top of the page starts with the phrase, "The project is currently over budget," with little expectation that if left to iterative reviews, with the contractor giving diminishing returns, that costs will be aligned or reduced significantly to make the scheme affordable. And if we go to the third paragraph from the bottom of this page, which starts accordingly. It is Appleyard's opinion that unless the project in its current guise is stopped and a fundamental review embarked upon to redefine the scope, programme and cost, it will fail. Now, in short, Appleyard's opinion reflects the points made in Robert Powell's email of 10th of April. Would you agree?
Yes.
What was your assessment of the recommendation?
I think I don't recall specifically what my thoughts were at the time, but this would have been passed on to my senior management team for their consideration.
And can you remember, would you have passed it up to Mr. Madison and Mr. Gibson then?
I would have done, yes.
And can you remember them expressing any view on the merits of the recommendation?
I can't recall what their thoughts were, sorry.
Don't worry. Now, you attended a TMO Programme Board meeting on the 24th of April 2013. If we can turn up those minutes, which are at TMO 00849-298. And if we can turn to page 4. And the third paragraph under the heading Grenfell Tower says this: there would be a meeting with the design team on the 25th of April. We were going ahead with kitchens and bathrooms, but there would now be no change to the nursery and boxing club in order to reduce costs. RBKC were aware of the situation on costs, but may not know all the detail. Now, the suggestion had been at the March TMO programme board that new kitchens and bathrooms would be included in the project and that the move of the boxing club and nursery should be reconsidered. Is that your recollection?
Yes, like I say, part of the overall consideration was the review of the whole design of the overall scheme.
And if we can go back to these minutes, they go on to say, if we can scroll down the page, reassurance was requested that RBKC were in agreement with our approach. Can you remember why TMO wanted to seek RBK's reassurance?
No, I can only imagine it was because we was looking at the design and various options of the design, that their overall approval of the considerations.
Can I ask you next about a meeting that took place between Robert Powell, Simon Cash and Peter Madison on the 21st of May? Now, reference is made to that meeting by Mr. Powell in an email we can see at ART *08858. And if we could just expand that. I'd just ask you to read that quietly to yourself, then I'll ask you.
Okay.
Now, were you at that meeting?
I don't recall. I'm not sure.
Given its subject matter, is it likely that you were there or unlikely that you were there?
Probably unlikely that I'd be at that meeting.
Can you remember any comment from Mr. Madison in which he said he'd been overruled by Laura Johnson or indeed anyone at RBKC?
No, sorry, I wouldn't have. You'd have to ask Peter.
Now, the report, that email says in its fourth sentence, also PM, so Peter Madison, not keen on progressing with Leadbitter. Our report kicking this all off was based upon the objective of preserving programme. This now not so important value for money is, accordingly, we are likely to reprocure scheme via ODU. First of all, why was Peter Madison not keen on progressing with Leadbitter at this stage? Can you remember?
I'm not entirely sure, other than they were difficult, as it says in some of the other statements, to provide information so we can make some informed decisions.
And did you understand that value for money was to take precedence over preserving the programme or timetable?
I felt that we were just trying to achieve as much as we could for the budget available.
Do you know where the prioritisation of value for money came from?
No, again, it wasn't. We were just trying to achieve as much as we could for the money that was available, and so and Leadbitter we was finding it difficult at the time to negotiate with them to provide their understanding of the breakdown of the costs, so we can interrogate it a bit more.
Now, you attended the TMO programme board on the 23rd of May 2013. The minutes can be found at TMO 100499960. Now, you attended for Grenfell, which is at item 6 on page 5. You reported there, in the second sentence, the first paragraph, reconfiguration of the project was still underway as RBKC wanted the boxing club and the nursery to remain in the project, and for environmental issues to be addressed, costs were being agreed so that we remained within budget. When did RBKC tell you that the boxing club and nursery were to remain in the project?
They wouldn't have specifically told me. I would have got that information directly from my line management. In this case, would have been Peter Madison.
Okay. You go on to report, further down in the third paragraph, Appleyards were looking at our procurement options as Leadbitters were proving difficult to work with. Options were being reviewed. Can you help us? What was the particular problem with Leadbitter at this stage?
As it's stated in previous documents you've shown, there was a £2 million deficit between Appleyards' cost of the project compared to Leadbitters, and to understand that difference we needed a full breakdown of how Leadbitters arrived to their valuation, and it was getting that full breakdown that was proving difficult, and I'm not entirely sure to this day if they provided that breakdown.
Could I now ask you to turn to ART /6232. Now, this is an addendum status report from Artelia, sent on the 24th of May 2013. Do you remember receiving that addendum?
Possibly, yes. I remember the document. I'm not entirely sure. The addendum, sorry.
Oh, this is the addendum.
Yeah, okay, yes,
Well, if we turn to page 5, and if we look at the first set of bullet points on that page, in particular the penultimate one, and if we could scroll down. If we could scroll down that page, you'll see a second set of bullet points. Now, if I could ask you to look at the third bullet point in that second one, reprogram the project in light of revised design and project parameters. In short, would you agree that Artelia had performed a volte-face following the meeting with the TMO on the 21st of May, and now effectively say that there was no substantive problem with reprocurement?
Yeah, they're saying reprocuring the project utilised no dual or appropriate framework to identify it is now favoured to clearly establish a competitive market price for the works.
Thank you. Now, can we look at the email under which this was sent, which is ART /001206? That says, please find the addendum to our report we discussed. This should now give you the comfort you are looking for to proceed with looking to reprocure the construction against our earlier recommendation, which was based on now obsolete information. Why do you think he used the words comfort you are looking for in that covering email?
I can't say, I'm not sure.
Why did TMO need comfort in relation to reprocurement?
I can't say, I'm not sure. You'll have to ask Robert Powell and Peter Madison.
Was it likely to have been Mr. Madison who sought comfort from Artelia in this regard?
Possibly.
Now, Simon Cash emailed Mr. Madison copying you in on the 19th of June, so 3 weeks or so after you received the addendum, and that's at ART /001241. And the second sentence says, I am aware that you have a board meeting tomorrow and may not have sufficient time to review what I have written, but in essence I've taken on board your comments and reworded sections to read in a better light. Can you remember now, why do you think Simon Cash rewrote sections of the report to read in a better light, to quote?
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm in this place to answer these. You're probably better asking Peter Madison, Simon Cash, sorry.
Okay. Can I now turn to the ex-over and the question of fire strategy? First of all, can you help us with how you or the TMO came to be aware of ex-over?
I thought about this before. I don't know, and I don't recall my understanding of how ex-over were introduced to the scheme. I can't remember how they were put forward. I can't recall. Sorry.
Okay. Could we turn to paragraph 50 of your first witness statement, which is at TMO /0885, and it's at page 9. And you say there, I recall that in around July 2012, it became clear that a new fire strategy was needed for Grenfell Tower, as it was unclear whether the assembly point should be. Exover Warrington Fire were therefore instructed by the TMO to review and report on the existing fire safety arrangements and to produce a fire strategy for the tower. I cannot recall how it came to be that Exover Warrington Fire were the company hired. I did not have any input into or review the strategy produced by Exover Warrington Fire, though I may have passed it on to the health and safety team and Carl Stokes. Now, you were asked about this statement by the inquiry, and you responded in your second statement at para 11, and the reference for that is at TMO 00847336. And you say there, as a project manager, I would not have the technical expertise to advise on the fire strategy. Now, pausing there, do you think that you had the technical expertise to understand the various reports and strategies produced for the TMO by Exova and the recommendations they made?
No, it wasn't my area expertise.
Did you read any of those reports and strategies they produced?
I'm sure I would have read through them, yes.
You go on to state that Exova was employed on the basis that it would report to Studio E, who were the lead consultant and therefore responsible for pre-contract pre-contract design. And then you go on in paragraph 12 to say, I would have expected that this document would have been read for information by the TMO's health and safety team and Mark Anderson. What do you mean by for information? Do you mean not for decision?
I'm not sure what the contents of the report was, whether it was for information or for them to make an informed decision. But I would assume that they would have read the document, and if there was a decision to be made, it would have been based around the information in the documents.
Now, in the last two sentences of paragraph 12, you say this: however, it would be quite wrong for the TMO to make decisions in relation to the fire strategy for a property unless these decisions were informed by the advice of professionals. For this reason, Exova were instructed to report directly to Studio E. Now, do you agree that it would be wrong for the TMO to make decisions in relation to fire strategy for a property without reading and comprehending the strategy itself?
Yes, they would have had to read the document, yes.
Do you agree that the TMO should at very least have read it, not just for information, but to make sure it covered all of the necessary aspects of the building and that they had discharged all relevant fire and safety obligations?
Yes, I believe they should have read it, yes.
And also to ensure that all necessary aspects of the refurbishment project had been considered properly?
Yes.
Can we now turn to what Mr. Anderson said about the instruction of Exova in his first witness statement at paragraph 63? And the reference for that is at TMO 100-48968. And page 14. And at paragraph 63, thank you. He says, 4 lines down, my understanding is that Exova were initially paid directly by the TMO, which provided the TMO with a direct contractual link to them. I believe this direct link was important, as the fire safety strategy and advice was going to be quite crucial to the success of the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower and the ongoing management of Grenfell Tower. Did you agree with Mr. Anderson's opinion that a direct contractual link was important to the TMO?
I do agree with it, but at the time, like I say, I would have felt Mark Anderson had more of the authority to make them judgment calls.
Do you feel that your role and experience and expertise allowed you to form a view as to whether the fire safety was quite crucial to the success of the refurbishment, as Mr. Anderson thought?
At this stage, when Mark was there, I was still administration, so I didn't have the authority to make judgment calls on this.
Can I now ask you to look at the minutes of the first design team meeting on the 19th of April 2012, which can be found at TMO 100011143. Now, as you can see, Exova was present at that meeting, represented by Jay Lee, who'd arranged. Now, who had arranged for Exova to be there? Was it you or someone else?
I can't recall, sorry.
Now, Exova sent a fee proposal to Bruce Soanes on the 9th of May 2012, and can we look at that? It's at TMO 100038885. Do you recall seeing that fee proposal?
I would have seen a fee proposal put forward, yes.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at page 2 and the second paragraph on that page, which says the aim of the fire safety work would be to ensure a high standard of fire and life safety for the occupants of the building, whilst highlighting any areas of the building's design that may represent an approval's risk. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember reading that?
I can't recall specifically, but I read this document.
Did you carry out any checks yourself to make sure that what Exova were offering to produce would meet their aim of ensuring a high standard of fire and life safety?
No, as I say, it's not my area of expertise. I wouldn't understand what forms of fire strategy.
Were you expecting, or was the TMO expecting generally Studio E to ensure that the scope of Exover's work was sufficient for those purposes?
I would have thought the design team had some input and given a brief for the Exover, yes.
Could we scroll down to the heading REBA Stage D/E? And the second paragraph, it states this: the fire safety design would be documented in the fire strategy report. This document would ultimately be submitted to the Building Control Authority in order to achieve regulatory approval. Were you aware that Exover were to produce a fire strategy report?
They were providing, yes.
Were you aware that the report should achieve regulatory approval?
Sorry, they were what?
Can you see the paragraph I've just quoted? The fire safety design would be documented in the fire safety report. This document would ultimately be submitted to the Building Control Authority in order to achieve regulatory approval. Were you aware that that would be the purpose or one of the purposes of the report?
No, so I wasn't aware that this report had to go to building control.
Are you able to help us whether this report, or a report rather, was submitted to building control in due course?
No, I'm not aware, sorry.
Did you respond in relation to that fee proposal, or would someone else have done so?
I may have responded, but on the authorisation from either Mark or Peter at the time, I can't recall which one was in management at that stage.
When you sent matters, for example, let's assume for this that you did respond to that fee proposal, would Mr. Madison prepare the draft for you to send, or would you prepare a draft that would then be reviewed and approved by Mr. Madison?
More than likely, it would be something I would have drafted and then asked them for their opinion and authorisation.
Okay. Would that be a routine process you followed whenever you were corresponding with contractors or anyone else involved in the refurbishment project?
For this particular project, it was, yes.
Okay. Now, in June 2012, you liaised with Exover regarding fire safety arrangements at the tower, and in an email dated the 13th of June 2012, and that can be found at ART 0000069. And you state, second line, for the moment, I'm only assisting Mark and all instructions or sign procedures remain with Mark. Again, that appears to be a fair reflection of the nature and extent of your role in June 2012. Would you agree?
Yes.
Now, can we next look at the minutes of the project design meeting on the 25th of June 2012, which is at SEA *04864. Now we can see there that you attended, the first attendee on that list. And if we could go to the bottom of page 3, to the section headed Previous Actions. And it says there in the second paragraph, there is no existing fire strategy for the building. Exover will need to prepare one as part of the upgrade works. SE, so Studio E, to chase. Do you remember reading that?
I was at the meeting. I don't remember. Yes, I would have read these minutes of the meetings.
Well, you were there.
Yes.
Were you concerned that there was no existing fire strategy for the building when you were told that?
It wasn't my area of expertise, and like I say, it wasn't for me to make the call on that.
But if you were told that there was no existing fire strategy for a building which was fully occupied, isn't that something that you ought to have raised with your superiors?
I would have thought that the TMO had the health and safety team and a fire safety officer, so they had this consultant, Cole Stokes, and it wasn't my area to make an opinion on that, sorry.
But sorry to press you on this, but you were the one at the meeting.
Yes.
You were told there was no existing fire strategy. Did you notify your superiors that that is what you had been told at that meeting?
I would have. These minutes would have been distributed to Mark Anderson, so they have also seen that comment as well.
Can we now look at the minutes for the project meeting on the 18th of July 2012, which can be found at SEA quadruple 05254. Again, you attended, you're first on the list of attendees. Can we turn to page 4? And you'll see the final item under the heading Previous Action states this: there is no existing fire strategy for the building, Exova to proceed. Did it concern you that at that stage no progress had been made on putting together an existing fire strategy?
I thought that Exova were appointed to look at the fire strategy, so I would assume that they were taking that in consideration.
Would you have notified your superiors that there was still no existing fire strategy?
Again, I'm sure they would have read the minutes of this meeting.
Could we go to the design team meeting minutes for the meeting on the 26th of July 2012, which are at SEA quadruple 05606. Now again, you attended. Second attendee identified. And if we go to page 4, see the final item under the heading Quantity Surveyor. Again, there is no existing fire strategy for the building. Can you remember whether Mr. Anderson, who was also in attendance, whether he was concerned that there was no existing fire strategy for the building?
You'd have to ask Mr. Anderson that question, sorry.
Okay. Could we now turn to an email dated the 13th of August 2012, which is at EXO quintuple 0194. Now, Exova emailed you requiring information relating to the current risk assessment, which I think is further down the chain. Now, other than forwarding the email on to Janice Ray, can you remember what steps you took to familiarise yourself with the fire risk assessments?
It wasn't my responsibility at that stage, sorry, so I'm not sure if I...
Okay. Can we turn now to...
Is the answer you didn't take any steps?
I don't recall what steps I would have taken at the time, but I would have relied on Janice Ray, the Health and Safety Advisor for the TMO. If there was any steps to be taken, she would have given advice.
Put bluntly, would you have acted as a postman and a mailbox for these purposes?
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was more of an administration role rather than making any judgment or any authorisation or instructions.
Okay. Could we turn to the draft fire strategy produced by Exova on the 16th of August 2012? And we can find that at TMO 1001925. Do you remember this document at all, Mr. Dunkerton?
I'm sure I read through this document, yes.
Now, there's an internal Exova email that was sent by the author of that report, Kate Cooney, on the 16th of August 2012. And if we could look at that briefly together, it's at EXO quadruple 01279. And we can see in that big paragraph, the final 3 lines, they say, they are making an existing crap condition worse. So it's a matter of working the worst bits out and making the new stuff work. Now, in the various meetings you attended before this report arrived, were you told either by Studio E, Exova, or indeed anyone else that the proposed changes would be making the existing building worse from the fire safety point of view?
No, sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
Now, if I could ask you to turn to minutes of a meeting on the 26th of July 2012, so 3 weeks or so before the draft arrived, and that's at ART quintuple 022. Again, you were there, the second attendee identified. Can you remember whether Claire Barker from Exova, you'll see her listed there on the schedule of attendees, did she say anything to you along the lines of making a crap situation worse?
No, I don't recall her saying that to me.
Okay. Can we now go back to Exover's internal email of the 17th of August 2012, which is at EXO quadruple 01279. If that could be amplified. And then you will see in the penultimate and final line of the first paragraph, no sprinklers wanted.
Yes.
Was that the TMO's view at the time?
I don't recall that being their opinion.
Can you remember any discussion of sprinklers as an option at Grenfell?
I can't say I do, no.
You attended a design team meeting on the 6th of September 2012. We can see the minutes at SEA quadruple 06157. Again, we see you as an attendee, second on the list. And if we can turn to page 2, you'll see the heading Fire in the bottom half of that page. If we look at the second entry, which says this, draft fire strategy needs detailed interrogation, and a meeting was arranged with SE Studio E early next week to review. Do you remember the discussion, or at least its gist, about the fire strategy at that meeting?
No, sorry, I can't recall the specifics of that discussion.
Were you briefed, or do you know of anyone who was briefed, on the substance of the detailed interrogation that was thought necessary?
No.
Do you remember any concern that the draft strategy required any further detailed work?
No, I did pass, I don't know if I passed this document to a gentleman called Carl Stokes for some advice. I'm going to retract that because it wasn't this document. It was about the design of the building, not this the current strategy, fire strategy. Sorry.
Could we go to the outline fire strategy provided by Exover on the 31st of October 2012, which is at EXO quintuple 0519. First of all, do you recognise this report?
Yes, I think I recognise this report.
Did you read it?
I'm sure I read this report.
Did you appreciate or were you made aware that in the bullet points under section 1, no mention is made of the intention to overclad the building? We can go to section 1 if that assists.
Okay.
Did you appreciate that none of those bullet points refer to cladding?
I'm not sure what you mean, sorry. I appreciate it didn't refer to cladding. No,
Would you see that cladding's not mentioned, is it?
It's not mentioned, no.
No. Did you appreciate or were you made aware that cladding had been omitted as a feature of the refurbishment?
No.
Could we turn to page 8 in this document and paragraph 3.1.4? Did you read or were you made aware of what was stated there? Namely, it is considered that the proposed changes will have no adverse effect on the building in relation to external fire spread, but this will be confirmed by an analysis in a future issue of this report.
I would have read through this report, yes.
Were you concerned that, given it involved cladding, the report didn't confirm that there would be no adverse changes as a result of the fitment of cladding?
No, I wasn't in a position to give judgment on specifics.
And so you wouldn't have made a note to have reminded yourself
No.
to consider future reports and how they address this issue?
No, it wasn't my specific role to analyse these in great detail.
Now, earlier on, you mentioned correspondence with Carl Stokes. Could I ask you to turn to CST quadruple 03104, which is an email you sent on the 10th of January to Mr. Stokes with instructions to comment on the Exova reports and assist on liaison with the LFB. Now, I'll let you just refresh your memory of that email.
Thank you.
Now, in the second line of that email, you say you engaged Exova with particular emphasis on means of escape and access and facilities for the fire service. Who decided that particular emphasis?
Okay, now, as I said earlier, I wasn't part of writing the brief for Exova.
Is this one of the emails you would have passed before others more senior to you before dispatching it to Carl Stokes?
No, this type of email will have been something I would have drafted myself to Carl Stokes.
Okay then, so on what basis did you say that Exova had been retained to provide a fire safety strategy, quotes, with particular emphasis on means of escape and access and facilities for the fire service, close quote?
Because I think that's what they were appointed to look at.
But my question is, do you know who decided that particular emphasis?
No, like I say, I wasn't part of the brief to put together for Exova.
Now, the next issue I'd like to discuss with you is wheelchair accessible flats in the tower. Now, if I could ask you first of all to turn to an email of the 11th of September 2012, which can be found at RBK 000026104. And if we scroll down, it's on the second page of the chain. Thank you. Now, Mark Anderson asked you to provide floor plans for the new residential units in Grenfell Tower to Claire Wise at RBKC. Do you remember that email at all?
I don't specifically remember it, but it was obviously passed to me, yes.
Now, if we go further up the chain to an email from Claire Wise on the 8th of November 2012, so roughly 2 months afterwards, and an email timed at 11:49. We can scroll up that chain. So we've got that. Can we go slightly further? No, we can't go further up. I might come back to that email because I don't think the references are right. Now, could I ask you to turn to RBK 000059434? Now, this is a statement from Claire Wise, and if I can ask you to turn to paragraph 45, which is at page 12. She says this: I have discussed above the access appraisal I undertook in respect to Grenfell Tower in 2012. This was different from an access audit. An access audit would only consider the accessibility to the public of publicly accessible areas of a building. By contract, the access appraisal that I undertook specifically considered access to and within the new flats that were proposed as part of the Grenfell scheme. Now, did you understand that the access appraisal only considered a wheelchair user's access to and within the flat?
No, so I was just asked to pass on documentation, which I did.
Okay. Now, could I turn next to the question of consultation with residents? And if I can ask you to turn to paragraph 60 of your first witness statement, which is at TMO quintuple 0885, internal page 11. And you say this: in my view, there was heavy resident consultation about the refurbishment during the time I was a project manager. This consultation period began in February 2012 and was still occurring when I left the organisation. Residents were consulted about matters including a new canopy, the communal areas and security, cladding, the children's play area, flat sizing, gas, heating, hot water and windows. Now, were you involved in planning the residents' consultation from the beginning, i.e. from February 2012 onwards?
Not at the very beginning of the project, no. I was asked to assist Mark in future resident consultation meetings, which I did.
Was there a plan in place for consulting residents before the planning application was submitted?
We did consultation with the residents around the planning application. So yes, there would be a plan in place.
Was that written down?
I don't recall seeing anything specific, no.
So how did you become aware of the substance of this plan for the consultation which you were involved in?
Well, in discussions with Mark Anderson, as I suggested, he asked me to help him with the consultation process, which were many parts, which is with newsletters, resident evening consultation sessions, drop-in sessions, which is where they drop in and out, and also being available for calls, to receive calls and answer calls relating to the project.
Now, you say at the beginning of this paragraph there was heavy resident consultation. What was the basis of your view that there had been such heavy resident consultation?
Well, as I suggested, I'd done evening drop-in sessions, evening sessions with the residents, with the project team. During the working day hours with drop-in sessions, we set up a project room within the base of the Grenfell Tower, displaying proposal designs, and there was a little model they displayed as well. Again, there was newsletters that we drafted out for residents. Again, I was taking calls and discussing with residents some of their specific concerns around the scheme. So I would say that was fairly heavy consultation.
And how would you go about ensuring that you secured the views of a representative spread of the residents of the tower?
There, as I recall, there were various different involvement with the concerns from not only just the residents but the local areas as well. I think there was a leaseholders, I can't remember the specific name of the group, Grenfell Tower Leaseholder Association, I recall, the Residents Association, and there was a few other various bodies that they suggested they were representing the voice for the rest of the building, all the residents.
But did you take any other steps to ensure that there was a representative sample of views obtained?
We done questionnaires that were sent out to residents as well, asking their views to put forward, which they did. So I think that there was plenty of opportunities for residents to come forward and express their concerns or views of the scheme.
And once you'd received residents' views, how did you consider them? What was the process whereby people read and evaluated the feedback?
In the newsletters that we drafted in conjunction with Mark Anderson as well, we would display and advertise what some of the feedback was from the residents or some of their concerns.
Can I now look at the means of consultation? And a consultation strategy was drawn up as part of the Studio E engagement statement, and that can be found at TMO 1001401. Now, can you remember who drafted the engagement statement document?
No, sorry, I can't recall. Studio E, I would have thought put it together as their name.
Did you have any role in it that you remember?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Could you turn to page 14 of this document? Now, this is a summary of the consultation with residents of the tower between February 2012 and August 2012. And in the box at the top of that page, you're recorded as the project manager. Now, did you prepare this consultation summary yourself?
I'm not sure I would have put this together myself. No, it would have been some input with various members of the design team and Mark Anderson as well, if this was my document.
Did you draft it?
I can't specifically recall drafting this, so I'm not sure.
Did you attend all of the resident consultation meetings between February and August 2012?
I would say I attended majority of them, but not all of them.
How would you characterise the number of attendees at these consultation meetings?
Sorry, how would I?
Was it high, low, medium?
It varied depending on the type of consultation, such as the roadshow or the evening resident consultation meetings. So it was varied. Some were attended more than others.
Which mechanism attracted the greater turnout?
I would say the evening consultations, in my opinion, were more attended.
Now, looking at the summary for the 15th of May 2012, it says second stage resident consultation took place with Lancaster West EMB and RA representatives. Now, am I right in thinking that RA stands for Residents Association?
Yes.
Can you remember now which RAs were invited?
No, sorry, I can't specifically recall which. There was one group, and I can't, sorry, and their name escapes me. It may have been the Residents Association group of Grenfell, and I think.
Who selected the resident associations to be invited?
The estates, the Lancaster Estate Office advised us who would be the best people to provide the invite to, and they would distribute it to the rest of the residents.
Can you help us as to why no feedback is recorded for the meeting on the 15th of May?
No, sorry.
Now, a questionnaire in May 2012 asked if residents wanted to be involved in the development proposals, and 13 replied that they did. Now, we can see that at page 10 of this document. Now, was a note kept of who those residents were who responded?
I'm sure there'll be some details who responded, yes.
Can you help us as to whether the TMO ever went back to those who had responded to ask them to be involved in greater detail with the project?
I'm sure they would have done, yes.
When you say you're sure they would have done, do you know that that's what happened?
No,
or is
I
that
don't.
an assumption?
That was an assumption.
Okay. Can we now turn to a project meeting on the 18th of July? We've looked at this before, but it's ART quintuple 0169. And if we can turn, you see your list as an attendee, and if we can turn to page 4, and again look at resident actions on page 3. Look at resident actions, and the second action is recorded as, quotes, resident focus group to be set up by TMO to interface with design team and contractor. Who had responsibility for setting up that resident focus group?
I believe Mark Anderson was working, and myself actually, with the estate office team, and they were helping us in the consultation process as well.
Do you know why the resident focus group was not in fact created?
I don't know, sorry.
Did you personally contact any of the residents who responded to the May 2012 questionnaire to ask them to participate in this focus group?
I don't recall contacting them myself, no.
If I could turn back to your first witness statement and paragraph 62, which is at TMO quintuple 0885, you said that you put together the newsletters. First of all, what help did you receive in preparing the content of these newsletters? From whom?
It depended on when the newsletters were sent. Some input was from the design team on some of the designs that we provided as samples in the meetings. Mark Anderson had some input into the content of the newsletters as well. And I believe just for formatting and the grammar of some of the newsletters, it went through RBK's communication team.
Did any single person review the contents of the newsletters for accuracy?
Yes.
And who was that?
I can't remember the lady's name, but she worked for the TMO. She was part of the communications team.
Do you know how she went about assessing the accuracy of the contents?
I'm not sure how she operated. No, sorry.
Now, could we go back to TMO 1001401 and go to page 40? Now, this is a newsletter you prepared explaining the cladding systems and how it would be used on the tower. Now, if I could ask the Opus operator to amplify the bottom half of this page, and you will see underneath the diagram in the right-hand corner, the second item refers to FR, fire retardancy, and then go to the bottom under the middle column. In somewhat obscure lettering, you can see the phrase fire retardancy there as well. Do you have them both?
Yes.
Now, to what extent, to your recollection, were residents informed of fire retardancy of zinc or any other material used for cladding during the consultation process?
I'm not aware of anyone asking specific questions around the fire retardancy of any material provided.
That's not quite an answer to the question put. Did anyone from the TMO or any of their contractors provide residents with information regarding the fire retardancy of zinc or any other material?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay. Were samples of cladding shown to residents at any of the meetings?
Yes.
And can you remember what samples were provided?
There was, I can't recall specifically, no, but there was all I know is there was a selection of different samples of cladding and other materials laid out on the big table for residents to view and feel and touch.
Was an explanation given to residents of the different properties of each type of cladding?
I can't specifically, I personally didn't give that discussion to residents.
Can you recall when the samples were put before the residents whether there was any explanation given of their fire retardancy or resistance properties?
I don't recall having that discussion with any residents myself.
Were residents consulted about the type of cladding as opposed to the colour of the cladding?
Yes, as I say, the cladding, all various types of cladding materials was provided to residents to feel and touch within the consultation meetings.
Could I ask the Opus operator to take us to page 42 within this document? Now, this is a newsletter of the 9th of August 2012. And it says, in relation to the event on the 12th of July, so on the left-hand column, halfway down, final sentence, there were no concern from residents about cladding the building. Did you attend the event on the 12th of July?
I'm sure I would have attended. I can't, like I say, I've attended the majority of the meetings. I can't remember which ones were or weren't attending. I think there was an attendance register taken. But so I said I can't recall.
Let's see. If I can jog your memory, could we go to a draft newsletter of the 15th of July 2012, which is at TMO 00837 If that could be expanded, please. And you'll see on the right-hand page, the middle column, penultimate entry says, first consultation meeting held on Thursday, the 12th of July, was not well attended, with only one resident taking the opportunity to meet with the team and discuss the project. Do you now remember that 12th of July meeting, given it only had one attendee?
I can't say I specifically recall that meeting. There was a few that were well attended, some that weren't well attended, and this was probably one of them.
Okay. Now, bearing in mind there was only one attendee on the 12th of July 2012, could I ask us to go back to the newsletter of the 9th of August, which is at TMO 100-49897? And page 3. And if we could expand the entry for the 12th of July, it says there were no concern from residents, plural, about cladding the building. Now, given there was only one person attending, how did you conclude that there were no concerns from residents about cladding expressed on the 12th of July 2012?
Well, the consultation meetings, evening meetings, weren't the only part of the consultation. As I suggested earlier, there was a project room set up at the base of Grenfell Tower displaying the proposal of the scheme. There was the questionnaire sent out to residents as well. So I'm assuming that meant that all parts of the consultation were taken in consideration and not just this evening consultation.
So notwithstanding this information related to what happened on the 12th of July meeting, where only one attendee came, your evidence is that there was no concern from residents about cladding, and that was due to other sources of information from the consultation exercise?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can we now compare the draft newsletter of the 15th of July 2012 and its final version? The draft, and if I'd ask the Opus operator to show these side by side, the reference for the draft is TMO 0083716, and the final version is TMO 1001401/42. Now, the draft is on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can see there in the right-hand column, the draft included questions put to residents and the number of the responses. And now, if we look at the final newsletter, you see that it only has the conclusions drawn from the responses, and it may help to de-amplify the final version on the right-hand side. There we go. Now, do you agree?
Yes, they're different. Yeah.
Now, looking at the third question in the draft, it said, what do you think the external cladding should look like? Colourful, robust, white aluminium, not reflective, leave as is, not sure. Now, if we look at the published newsletter of the 15th of July, in the right-hand column, fourth point down, it says there is no clear opinion about the colour or type of external cladding. Sorry, that's it. If I can ask for TMO 100140133 to be put up for that purpose. I don't think that's the right reference. What we should have is 1001401/33. Go forward on a page. Right. Fourth point down, it says there is no clear opinion about the colour or type of external cladding. Do you agree?
Yes.
Now, looking at the questions which residents were actually asked, do you agree that residents were not consulted on the type of cladding? They were simply asked about the colour. And it may help if the Opus operator puts up the draft, which was TMO 0083716. So just waiting for that to be put on the screen. And if the right hand side, there we go. So refreshing your memory, looking at the questions that are actually asked, do you agree that residents were not consulted on the type of cladding? And do refresh your memory looking at that document before you answer.
Yes, I recall this because the reason we was discussing colour schemes is because there was a clear preference from the planning department. I was advised from Studio E of the type of colour that should be displayed on the building. And they wanted quite vibrant colours throughout the building, escalating up to the top, that wasn't consulted with the residents. And part of the consultation is what are your colour schemes, and part of the consultation that we did, we had various different colour charts available along with the samples of the cladding that then residents can give a preference.
My question was, do you agree that residents were not consulted in relation to the type of cladding?
At this particular newsletter, it didn't say that, but they were advised of the types of cladding because, as I suggested earlier, there was different samples available for them to feel, touch and pass their opinion on.
Now, can you explain the discrepancy between the question asked and the conclusion drawn in the final version of the newsletter? So the final version of the newsletter, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, says 4 points down, there is no clear opinion about the colour or type of external cladding. Looking over at the right-hand screen, which shows the draft, they were only asked about the colour, weren't they?
On the questionnaire that went out,
Yeah.
they were asked about the colour, yes.
Yeah. And so, can you explain how the conclusion was reached that there was no clear opinion on the type of external cladding, given that the type of external cladding was not a question asked in the questionnaire?
As I said, the samples, the questionnaire put out was specific questions that would try to target the residents' feel of the colour scheme of the display for the tower, and the samples were available for residents to feel and touch, and perhaps it was before or after this meeting that happened.
Can you help us whether it was when the samples were shown to residents, was it before or after
I can't.
15th of July?
I would have to follow the sequence in some of these newsletters to get a bit of better understanding.
Okay. Now, can we just look at the draft on the far right-hand side, and you'll see the final question is, would you like windows that you could clean yourself? Yes, 6, no preference, 1. Now, compare that to the published version of the newsletter on the left-hand side of the screen, where it says, quote, you do not have a clear preference about whether residents should clean the windows or KC TMO. Now, again, can you give an explanation as to the apparent discrepancy between the answer in the draft and the answer as summarised in the final version?
I would put my version of a draft newsletter together that then went to the management team, Mark Anderson, and then finally went to the communications team, and that's my only explanation of how the changes in the format and some of the content would be different.
So is that possibly another question for Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I suggest.
Could I ask the Opus operator to take down TMO 00837616, but leave the other document on the screen? And could I ask the Opus operator to take us to page 42 within the document on the screen? And go back to that's the newsletter of the 9th of August 2012. And you'll see there a reference to a consultation on the 26th of July. And the newsletter reports, external cladding proposal favourable to residents seem to be for profiled zinc. Although we seem to have some feedback on the type of cladding, it is still undecided on your preferred colour for the cladding. Again, just for the sake of completeness, how did you conclude that residents had a preference for profiled zinc cladding?
It will probably be through the consultation meetings that we have with residents.
Probably. Did you say?
Yeah, I can only assume that through the evening consultation meetings and some of the feedback we've had from residents, they expressed their preferred option as being the zinc cladding.
Thank you. Now, can I turn to the question of conversation with residents? You provided your contact details in the various newsletters. Did residents contact you to ask about the detail of the regeneration project?
Yes, there were residents that contacted me about the project, yes.
Do you recall promising Ed DeFarn during a meeting with residents in 2013 that residents would be consulted with and given the opportunity to view and comment on a variety of different windows and cladding options?
Yes.
And that also the TMO would be open to engaging with residents and taking on board their feedback?
Yes.
When you left the TMO, did you tell either David Gibson, Peter Madison or anyone else at the TMO that you had promised that meeting to Mr DeFarn?
I actually met Mr DeFarn, so the promise was probably being fulfilled. And as for handover for Peter Madison, I gave a full handover document to Peter Madison, which included resident consultation.
Thank you. Now, during your time on the project, there were changes to cladding and window options shown to residents. Before leaving in July 2013, did you, as part of the handover you provided for Mr Madison, provide or suggest that residents be notified of any proposed changes and given the option to select alternatives?
No, I think that would be part of the design team.
And why do you think that would be part of the design team's role?
Because there was various different displays and types of operation of the windows that were available.
So they would be best placed to give that information?
Yes.
Now, as part of your role, you were tasked with liaising with residents about matters regarding the block and the refurbishment, aspects of the refurbishment that were of concern to them. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Would you agree that it would be reasonable for residents to contact you regarding the status of planning applications for the refurbishment?
Yes, they did, yes.
Could I ask you to turn up TMO 00849-213? Thank you. Page 5 within that. Thank you. Now, on the 28th of March 2013 at 15:01 hours, Ed DeFarn forwarded to you an email exchange with Francis O'Connor about consultation on calc. He then asked for an update regarding the planning application for Grenfell. You forwarded the email exchange to David Gibson on the 9th of April at 16:22, and that's at page 4 of this chain. And if we go up to that, and if that could be expanded. There we go. Actually, it's the email. Scroll down. No. Can you scroll down a bit more? Excuse me a second. I might just come back to this question. Could I just ask the Opus operator to go up to page 3? No, I'll come back to this so that the email reference can be checked. Can I turn on to complaints about lack of consultation? I now want to deal with concerns raised by residents during the planning for Grenfell Tower. And if I could ask the Opus operator to turn up RBK 000-45642. And page 6 within that. And this is an email dated the 12th of July 2012, sent by Tunde Awodera of the GTLA, the organisation referring to earlier. And he sent a complaint to you. And if we could scroll down so we can see the substance of that. Further. Can we scroll down so we can see the substance of it? Where he said, in the second paragraph, there is clearly an established lack of a communication from the K&C TMO, the tenant-led organisation, and their sub-agents, since we did not receive the appointment of Studio E letter before we pointed out that we had not received it. Did you only send the letter of the 4th of July confirming the appointment to Studio E after GTLA had requested it?
I don't recall the timing of sending the letter, sorry.
Had you tried to include GTLA in consultations with residents before their letter was sent to you?
When I was involved, I tried to do communication with all the residents, prior to my involvement and the appointment of Studio E, I'm not entirely sure what the consultation was with residents at that stage.
Can you help us as to whether any consideration had been given at that stage as to whether leaseholders would be charged for the works at Grenfell at that time?
Sorry, no, I wasn't involved in that part of the scheme.
Now, can I talk about complaint about doors, consultation and maintenance of fire safety systems? And if I could turn to TMO 00837 229. Thank you. And page 3 on that chain, I say hopefully. And Tunde Awadero wrote to David Ward on behalf of the GTLA after receiving David Ward's letter. And that's the 11th of October. We don't need to go to it for these purposes. Now, David Ward had written to all leaseholders notifying them of their responsibility to ensure their front door was compliant with fire safety regulations. You were copied into that email. Now, he raised concerns about exclusion of leaseholders from the fire door replacement programme, the failure to notify leaseholders for 19 months that their flat entrance doors may not be fully compliant, the TMO's lack of maintenance of fire systems, and a lack of consultation on improvements to the tower. Now, your response is on the 14th of December 2012 and could be found at TMOH 000027328 and page 2 of that chain. Now, if we can scroll up to page 1, there we go. That shows it's from you. And if we could ask a few questions in relation to that. Can you remember why you were chosen to respond to his complaint?
As I said earlier, I was part of the administration to help manage the project, and part of that was looking at some of the complaints and concerns from residents.
And did you seek contributions from anyone else in preparing the response you sent to Mr. Awadero on the 14th of December 2012?
Yes, I think I would have sought some guidance from the TMO on this.
From Janice Ray?
Yes.
From Daniel Ward?
Yes.
Can you help us what Daniel Ward's role was?
Daniel Ward, as I believe, you'd have to forgive me, was some time ago. He was part of the leaseholder service team. I forgot his job title, sorry.
Did you have any direct knowledge from your work on the fire door replacement programme as to why there was such a long delay in notifying leaseholders after the tenants' doors were replaced?
No, sorry. Like I said earlier, I picked this project up at the tail end when it was coming to a conclusion, so I'm not entirely sure what consultation had gone on prior to my involvement.
Thank you. So that might be a convenient place at which to stop.
Well, it would seem very suitable then. Thank you very much. Mr. Dunkerton, it's 1 o'clock, time we had a break so that everyone can get some lunch. So we'll stop now. We'll start again, please, at 2 o'clock. And please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you go to the usher then, please?
Okay.
Good. 2 o'clock.
Thanks, sir.
Please. Thank you.